I understand that issue came up, I suppose, in terms of lifting restrictions and imposing restrictions as well, and committee members asking for exact guides, numerical guides as to when any of these might happen.
Yeah, I mean, they sort of said that it was inappropriate to have exact figures, because then you were stuck with those exact figures. I mean, I don't necessarily accept that, because I mean, it's good to have figures, because if you reach a certain level, you might at least be able to fall back on them and say, well, look, we have, in my view, you have to encourage a population and say, well, look, if we reach a certain figure, we will be able to drop back a level in restrictions. And I think perhaps it was unfortunate when the government were initially setting this, that there were no counties deemed to have sufficiently low levels to be at level 1. But the other thing that they said was they were looking at other factors, including local factors that they had access to. For example, in Waterford, there was a spike in cases which might, on the face of it, have justified an increase in restrictions, but that they were able to ascertain that was as a result of an outbreak in a meat plant. Similarly, in Tipperary, there was a spike in cases, but that was also linked to an outbreak.
The system at the moment whereby they say, look, we take into account a lot of different things, is that just too vague for you? Does it leave too much room for a subjective approach?
See, these restrictions are deemed essential for public health, but I suppose public health isn't the only aspect of our health system. I mean, and the decisions do have a huge impact on other areas of health. They also have an impact on, I suppose, people's psyche and sense of well-being, mental health, and fundamentally they also have an impact on people's livelihoods, right to earn a livelihood, and indeed liberty and ability to travel. And I think it's good to have objective criteria. I mean, I personally would have preferred to have seen objective criteria, which of course could be overridden by methods if they thought there were circumstances in which it was appropriate to do so. But I mean, the lack of any criteria is something that I think is worrying. I mean, I did question, does having a minister in the constituency matter? I mean, I'm not saying it did matter, it does matter, but I mean, these can't be purely recommendations that are made by a body which is making sensitive, albeit very sensitive, deliberations, because they're done in private, and then they make a recommendation to government, and the government does or doesn't accept them. So heretofore we're told the government had accepted them, but I mean, there have to be objective criteria if this is a plan that's going to be rolled out and is going to be put in place for a long period of time. I do think, as I said, transparency is important, public accountability is important, and democratic accountability is important, given the big impact that all of these decisions are having, and the huge impact they're having in our economy as we face into framing a budget, which is at the 13.5% of the workforce. The budget is being framed on the basis that 13.5% of the workforce have lost their jobs now. In the year after the financial collapse, it was 9%, okay. So 50% greater. So that will give you an idea of the scale of the impact that all of this is having in our state.
You used the word fault there a moment ago. Was there much discussion today about young people who seem to be shouldering all the fault for the spread of COVID in recent weeks?
There was, and again, it was Dr. Flynn who replied primarily, saying that he wanted that there had this culture of fault that set in, and he wanted to move away from that, and that's something that I would very much personally believe as well. I mean, obviously, we don't condone people behaving recklessly, we don't condone people behaving stupidly, but equally, this is a very hard time to be a young person in Ireland. I mean, I remember going to college myself in UCC quite a long time ago, and the circumstances that pertain then are hugely different to what young people now are going to have to live with. And I think it is a very difficult time to be a young person in this country, as it is to be an old person.